Hello and welcome to the Washington Times Politically Unstable. I'm Kelly Sadler, and today I'm joined by Alex Berenson, who is an award-winning journalist and author. And we're going to talk about the president's decision, perhaps to reclassify marijuana as a Schedule III drug. The president said that he was going to make this decision within the next few weeks. We know that his administration's been lobbied heavily by the cannabis industry, who says the reclassification would help them become more profitable. The medical community has argued it allowed them to study marijuana and as a medical drug and its potential uses. As well as, the president has cited high levels of arrest and incarcerations and wanting to bring those down for people who want to use pot recreationally. This is a very complex issue, Alex, and I know that you've written a book about it. Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. Many states have already, legalized the use of marijuana. We're seeing it just walking down the streets of DC, for example. You can almost get a contact high. What are your thoughts as the president deliberates what to do about the reclassification of marijuana?
Sure. So the president has a difficult decision ahead. As you said, he has been lobbied a lot by the cannabis industry, which obviously would like cannabis moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, mainly for the tax benefits that it would have. Right now, basically, all its profits are taxed at a very high level, at a very high rate, and that's made it difficult for the industry to grow. I think what the president has to ask himself is not, hey, should we be throwing a lot of people in jail for cannabis use? Because I think almost every American would agree we shouldn't really, and we don't. That's the thing, we don't. Cannabis is legal on the state level in many states. Most states either medically or recreationally, and many states recreationally. And even in states where it's not legal, which is just a handful, there's almost nobody in jail at this point for cannabis possession or even low-level dealing. Now, it's not true that people don't get arrested for cannabis use sometimes. But, people get arrested for alcohol use, and alcohol is legal, right? If you're drinking and driving, you can be arrested. And if you're high and driving, you can be arrested. That's a cannabis arrest, but that's not a function of the basic legality of the drug. That's a function of what you're doing with it. So to me, the question is not, hey, do we want to put, millions of people in jail for cannabis? Because we're not doing that. We're not going to do that. The question the president should be asking himself is, do I want to facilitate an industry that is promoting the use of this dangerous drug to minors and to, and promoting sort of unhealthy and problematic levels of use? Because it's well known, this is true of alcohol, and it's even more true of cannabis. It's true of all illegal and legal drugs, legal recreational drugs, that most of the revenues an industry generates are generated by a tiny fraction of people who are heavy users, who oftentimes have problems as a result of their use, who create problems for other people and their families as a result of their use. And so, does the president of the United States want to say, hey, I'm going to help, this industry make a little bit of extra money on the backs of a lot of people who have real problems with use and their family members? And we're already seeing in the states that have legalized, and sort of more generally because attitudes towards cannabis have changed, we're seeing a lot more hospitalizations from people with something called scromiting, it sounds like a fake thing, but it's a real thing where you use so much THC that you mess up your ability essentially to swallow, and you can wind up vomiting so much that you end up in the ER. And in extreme rare cases, people actually die because their electrolytes are so messed up. That may sound unbelievable, but it is true. We're seeing children, have overdoses on gummies, and in some cases they need to be hospitalized too. And we're seeing what I wrote about in Tell Your Children, which is a lot of mental illness that's related to cannabis use. And so, the president doesn't have to say, I want to put, 1 million people in jail. He can just say, look, I don't think at the federal level legalizing this industry makes sense.
To the point on children and gummies, as recreational use and medical use has become more available and legal in states, the New York Times actually did a story this week about all of the children that are inadvertently taking their parents' gummies either to school or whatnot, just thinking that they're candy. And the Poison Control Center, and then the calls to the Poison Control Center. In 2009, there was 930 cases of children being poisoned by marijuana. Just last year, there was 22,000. And I think this is what we're seeing as more states move to legalize. 75% of those 22,000 were kids. Also, the New York Times did a story 2 years ago, last year, about how 65-year-olds and older, how the elderly population is also seeing an increased in rise of hospitalizations because of marijuana misuse, going into seizures, becoming disoriented, whatnot. And hospitals aren't required to record all of the hospitalizations they see because of cannabis. So these numbers are probably grossly underreported at this point. But I mean, this is a real social hazard. We have the government trying to go after vaping in the vaping industry and shut that down because of the harmful effects it has on children. Yet it seems like everyone is really embracing a wider use of marijuana in all of its forms, edibles being just one of them.
Yes, well, I mean, there's been a very concerted campaign, and I wrote about this in Tell Your Children in 2019, and it's only continued since, by both, drug legalizers who are sort of ideologically committed to encouraging, I would say in some cases, but certainly facilitating drug use. And then you get an industry that grows on the back of that, where people think, well, I can grow this stuff. It literally grows like a weed. And if I can sell it for $100 an ounce, that's a pretty good business for me. It turns out it's not such a good business for a variety of reasons. The legal industry has a very hard time competing with the illicit market in cannabis. And in some states actually is now asking for help from state governments like California. But so you get this group of people who are very committed to talking about how wonderful cannabis is, how it really is a great medicine, even though there's essentially no or almost no medical uses for cannabis. The joke I make in Tell Your Children, and the joke I'll make today is the condition that cannabis treats is called not being high. And you know what? That it's okay. It's not my drug of choice, but some people like the high that cannabis produces. But let's legalize it if we're going to legalize it, which I don't think we should, on that basis, on the basis that this is a recreational drug and we don't really care if adults want to get high with it. Now, I think that's the most honest case to make for legalization, but it's not a particularly compelling case, which is except for I would say maybe a third of the country is just willing to go with that. So the industry has found all these other excuses, basically around the idea that it has tremendous medical benefits, and the idea that there are a ton of people in jail for cannabis possession. Unfortunately, neither of those things is true. And then one other thing I'll say is that, it seemed that throughout the 2000s and then the 2010s, there was steadily growing support for legalization. It sort of ticked up year by year by year. But now it actually seems to have peaked and possibly come down a little bit, because I do think people are seeing, particularly parents are seeing, this stuff can really get to my teenage kid, particularly the newer vapes that are essentially concentrated THC or very high potency flower, smokable cannabis that's 20 or 30% THC. It's just so much stronger than what adults, who grew up in the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s are used to. And they're seeing, hey, I don't like what this has done to my son or daughter or to their friends. And so we are seeing a bit of a leveling off, possibly even a decline in support for legalization, albeit at a pretty high level.
So the president argues that reclassifying marijuana or cannabis is not the same thing as legalization. It still will be classified as a drug, but it's a slippery slope, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it would ratify the state legalization, the state level legalizations in a way that nothing else at the federal level has. And it would certainly encourage the industry. It would make the industry more profitable. It would be, there's a reason why the industry is pushing for this so hard. I think they know that federal legalization is unlikely at this time. Maybe if a Democratic president is elected, they would go for that. But this would be a pretty strong win for them. And so I do think, I think it's an important decision. And for the president to say, "Hey, I'm not really legalizing," that's a bit of a cop out. I think he knows the difference. He's a smart guy. He knows that this would be an important win for the industry.
And lastly, we keep saying the industry and the commercials that are being paid for by the industry on all of our TV screens right now are arguing that this would be a boon to Black and brown communities. It would allow these entrepreneurs to open up their own cannabis shops, make money, and that they've been inhibited because of the high taxes. But this isn't just a bunch of small businesses propping up on Main Street or, by entrepreneurs. This is an industry. Go ahead.
These are publicly traded companies. They're big companies. And, it is ironic, right? For 50 years, African-American lawmakers tried to get tobacco ads out of Harlem, out of, the east side of DC, out of the south side of Chicago. They tried to get alcohol, stores and out. And they said, this is bad for our communities. We suffer from this more than wealthy white communities, and we're being targeted. And they were right. They were being targeted. And so it's so ironic to hear, oh, well, this is an opportunity for African-American entrepreneurship. The people who suffer the most from this are the people who have the most to lose, are the people, with the least. And I do think that we should remember that.
All right. Well, Alex, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your expertise in this manner and all the research that you've done on it. And we'll have to see what the president ultimately decides. But as a mother of 3 young boys, I'm certainly rooting against him reclassifying this to a Schedule III drug. Thank you so much.
He's smart. And I will say it's pretty clear, that he's not very into drugs or alcohol personally. Yeah. That's not his thing. And so I hope that, he remembers that too, that, I think he's seen in his life the effect that, that certainly that alcohol use can have on people. And this is just another, dangerous recreational drug. And I hope he remembers that.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex.